During the week, the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese met with the President of China, Xi Jinping, and it was the fourth meeting between the two, and it's a strategically significant meeting. And this isn't all just about diplomacy, it's about securing Australia's future in a region that is becoming more complicated every single day. The Albanese government has done a lot of work to reset the relationships with our biggest trading partner, but the Conservative media and the coalition are still stuck in that outdated Cold War mindset where China is still regarded as the biggest threat. There's always turmoil over there, or there's a possibility of war and invasion, while Albanese is going on and just creating the real opportunities for Australian exporters and for universities and for workers through clever trade and diplomatic processes. And all we get from the coalition and the mainstream media is this anti-China rhetoric. There's constant suspicion. There's a lot of sword rattling about a hypothetical war over Taiwan, and would Australia side with the United States in that event? And I just think that nobody wins if Australia becomes this pawn in a battle between China and the United States. Now, the coalition had a decade pretty much to diversify trade and assert Australia's independence, and they failed dismally and almost destroyed Australia's trade with China, and also got engaged with the failure of the AUKUS deal in 2021, which no one seems to understand what's in the agreement. And now that Labor is rebuilding a constructive relationship with Beijing and advancing Australia's interests, well, all of a sudden China is this big national security threat. And I think that in a world where the US is increasingly volatile and unpredictable and China's influence is growing, I think that Albanese is playing this game carefully, and it's a game that values diplomacy, economic security, and it values Australia's interests rather than just this blind loyalty to the United States.
We've been hard on the Labor government, as really we should be. We should acknowledge when they do things right. And this is true when Liberals are in too. It's just that the Liberal Party, sadly and regrettably, did very little right. But the Labor Party has managed so far its relationship with China pretty well. It's a difficult course to navigate because we do have agreements with the US, not just the abhorrent AUKUS scheme, but other trade agreements and other. Now, with the current US government, everything's up in the air and nothing is certain, which you couldn't, even with George W. Bush. That was never the case. Australia always knew more or less where it stood with America. Yes, America has pushed what it wants from us and been taken more than it's given on cases, but to be really, really fair, that's international politics, and that's the way it goes. Under the Trump regime, it's much less predictable, it's much less stable, it's much less manageable, whereas Xi in China, who's not an ideal leader by any standard, but there's a predictability and a stability there. Trustworthiness is probably too strong a word, but we know that the Chinese government isn't about to throw in Australian trade. And we hope and we think that the Australian government isn't about to throw away our biggest trading partner. The coalition, for some reason, and I think really the reason is, one, they're not that capable, sadly, but two, the dog whistle, which has worked for them so well in the past, is there when you talk about the Chinese threat. Someone on Twitter, I think it might have been Blue Sky, pointed out that the press demands Anthony Albanese bring up the issue of human rights in China when he meets with Xi. Okay, fair enough, yes. Nobody ever asks if he brings up the issues of human rights with Donald Trump. And given what's happening in the state, people being deported and threatened to be deported even though they're full citizens and in some case were born in the United States, is a gross violation of human rights. Alligator Alcatraz, where they're putting people and essentially half-starving them. It's a gross and awful breach of human rights. So yeah, why doesn't he bring up that? And fair point, but no one ever asks him to do that. But with Xi or with any other Asian leader, if he doesn't talk about it, it's weak leadership and poor diplomacy.
And I think that this meeting is more than just a photo opportunity, and for me it's a clear change of direction within the Australia-China relationship. And after that diplomatic freeze under the Morrison government. I think that this is exactly what needed to be done. And the export process has been cleared up. There's all of these barriers that were previously placed on Australian wine, barley, timber, coal, lobster. I think there were quite a few other things that had sanctions or high tariffs on them. Well, that's all gone now. And that supports a lot of Australian producers and regional communities within Australia. And Anthony Albanese and Jodie Hayden, they also had private dinners with Xi Jinping and his wife, Peng Li Yuan, and she's a folk singer as well, so maybe they had a few sing-songs after the banquets that they had as well. And this has all been rubbished by the right-wing media as well. But having these strong personal relationships with such powerful leaders, or with such a powerful leader as Xi Jinping, and Xi Jinping is certainly a lot smarter than someone like Donald Trump, but having this type of relationship with China is very good for Australia. And instead, what we get locally is outrage. Sky News and Murdoch Media, they accuse Albanese of appeasement, of selling out to Beijing, betraying Australian independence, even criticising Anthony Albanese for doing a media conference in China in front of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flags.
One thing that surprised a lot of people, including me, during the PM's China visit is the backdrop to his press conference yesterday. Yep. Even on an overseas trip, when he held a media conference, he wasn't satisfied with the Australian flag. He stood in front of 3 flags, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flags as well. Why?
And generally, I don't think any of this is really going to undermine what Albanese is doing in China. I think he's decided, well, this is what's got to be done, and I'm just going to go ahead and do this. But I guess that, well, I'm mainly pointing it out just to highlight how most of the Australian media, and the coalition too, are completely paranoid about their relationship with China. And I don't know if this paranoia is just a leftover of that historical paranoia in Australia in the 19th and the 20th century, but I just thought that it would have been stopped by now.
They're an organisation that wishes to return to this idealised past. Maybe not as much as, say, One Nation or the various more extreme right-wing groups who, as Paul Keating pointed out, long for a past that never existed. Those weren't his exact words, but that's what he meant. A past where there were no people of colour, there were no immigrants. Everyone was happy and everyone was wealthy. This has never existed.
Yeah, I can't remember those days, David.
No. And I guess it's nice to have a vision, but the vision has to be rooted in some kind of plausible reality. It becomes embarrassing. And while it's easy, I suppose, to look at the people who maybe look a bit different to us and who maybe approach things a little bit differently to us, and I'm not getting into the whole notion of human rights abuses, and that's an important thing. But I do think that building strong relationships with strong neighbours and being in a position where you can say, well, hey, you should treat these people better, or you should be more mindful of how you treat people, and you should release these political prisoners from jail. We don't have the economic muscle to be able to say, oh, we will stop trading with you. We don't have the military muscle to enforce it, and neither should we. But gently put, but firm criticism. But we do need to do it to the United States too, and probably in a more urgent way, because America has the tradition of being the land of the free, the purveyor of human rights, of being one of the world's model democracies, and we're not doing that. I guess what I'm saying is that we've got to have a press, and I say this every week, so say it with me, everyone, we've got to have a press that grows up and a better press.
And beyond this strong trade with China, and just for some context, China is Australia's number one trading partner at 27% of the entire export market, and that's valued at $180 billion per year. The United States, well, that's just at 4.6% of our export market, and that's valued at $30 billion. Now, that's still quite a lot of money, but in comparison with China, that's quite small. But it's almost the reverse with regional security. Not so much in the numbers, but just in the way that we look at America for defence and security. But whenever there's anything to do with China, there's always this talking up of China invading Taiwan as though it's going to happen tomorrow, or even invading Australia, that's going to happen tonight. And if this happens, well, what's Australia going to do about it? Is Australia going to join the United States in the war against China if China invades Taiwan? Here's an exchange between Monique Wright from the Seven Sunrise Program and James Lawrenson from the Australia-China Relations Institute at the University of Technology in Sydney.
OK, let's talk about Taiwan first. We've been hearing about this potential conflict now for years. How likely are we to see Beijing try and take Taiwan by force?
Well, if you're asking me, I don't think it's very likely at all. And what we're hearing out of the Americans at the moment, to be honest, it's a bit nasty, because what they've waited for is for Albo to be on the ground in China and then demand that Australia line up with America in a war against China. And don't forget, Mon, this is a war that America hasn't even committed to.
Yeah, this is a hypothetical on a hypothetical, right?
Right.
OK, if we're talking in hypotheticals, what would a conflict over Taiwan look like for our region?
Here's what the Prime Minister had to say about this.
I think it's important that we have a consistent position, which Australia has had for a long period of time. We support the status quo when it comes to Taiwan. We don't support any unilateral action there. We have a clear position, and we have been consistent about that. What's important when it comes to international relationships is that you have a stable, orderly, coherent position going forward. Australia does. We want peace and security in our region. We don't want any change to the status quo. That's Australia's position today. That was Australia's position last week. That's been a bipartisan position for a long period of time.
So, hypotheticals, David, I guess we always have to be prepared. What should we do if New Zealand becomes a hostile communist Maori superpower and invades Tasmania? We need to be prepared, because that's a hypothetical. It might never happen, but it could happen at some point. So we just have to be prepared. What are we going to do? So it's the same sort of level of idiocy, really, but we ended up having these...
Those Antarctican scientists locked away going slowly mad. Clearly they're going to do something aggressive and violent to Australia.
Well,
it's the nearest country.
Well, it's very hypothetical, but we do need to be prepared for this hypothetical situation. So
they're very smart people and can make weapons from anything. I mean...
Well, that's right, but that's the level of stupidity that we get with all of this stuff. We had the barrage of these stupid hypotheticals, and it just extends that paranoia, or it's trying to get that gotcha moment or the scoop for the journalists, and it's all just really insane. And US military commanders are also pushing that narrative that we do need to be prepared for a possible conflict in Asia in 2027. And I guess when they mention Asia, they mean China. Why 2027? We're not sure. No one's really explained that. And the only reason that I can think of is that
it's those Bangladeshians in Asia, they're putting together a big army. 2027, it'll be ready.
Well, that's right. Well, we better watch it. But the only reason that I can think of is that 2027 would be the lead up to...
And hello to all our Bangladeshian listeners. I'm joking, of course.
But that would be the lead up to the election year in the United States, which would be 2028. So the Republicans might want to create some sort of skirmish there or trouble in Southeast Asia just to boost their election chances. But aside from that, it's just not going to happen. And Australia is probably caught between two powers at the moment. But I think that with clever diplomacy, it might be able to get the best of both worlds. And that's what diplomacy is all about, getting the best out of all worlds, really. And I think that Albanese might be able to create an even stronger economic and diplomatic link with China. And who knows, that might create an avenue and a link towards the BRICS movement, which is starting to get a lot of momentum as a counterbalance to the hegemony and control of the United States. And I just think that that opens up a lot of creative possibilities within global geopolitics. And this is coming at a time when the power of the United States is starting to fade. And under Donald Trump, it is starting to fade quite quickly. And that's surprising a lot of people and analysts as well. But I think that we just have to stop being so fearful of China. Gough Whitlam opened up that pathway for Australia all the way back in 1971. And that was even before he became the Prime Minister, David. He did go to China a couple of times in 1973 while he was Prime Minister, but this started a long, long time ago. And I think that Anthony Albanese is just adding to this process, and I can only see benefits for Australia going well into the future.
He got laughed at for going to China. Then Richard Nixon went. He was ahead of Nixon in getting over there and seeing the importance of China and the desirability of China to be part of a peaceful relationship rather than being an antagonistic one. And yes, Nixon was corrupt and what have you, but with the benefit of hindsight, even quite leftish or liberal, as they call them in the States, historians will say that Nixon, it was probably his greatest achievement as president, opening up those ties with China. And yeah, Gough Whitlam was weeks or months ahead of him. And Paul Keating, of course, always spoke of the importance of Australia really being an Asian country, which drove the more traditionally minded amongst politicians and pollsters and pundits. That always irked them, but I think he was right. I can criticise Paul Keating up and down the wall, but on that he was absolutely right, that Australia needed to think about, one, not only where it stood politically in the world, that it was not really part of a mega power system, but was a middling power, but where it was in the world as well. And it was a middling power, but a major power in the Asia-Pacific region. Now, when we look at it from that point of view, Australia has a big role to play in world affairs and antagonising the Chinese. And they showed us under Abbott and Morrison particularly, and Turnbull to a lesser extent, that we needed them more than they needed us. And we've either got to grow up or live in our bedrooms pretending that it's still 1950 and that nice Mr. Menzies has it all covered for us.